You're listening to Building the Broncos with Nick Kendell and Carl Dumler, Broncos country's leading draft and scouting analysts. Head on over to milehighhuddle.com to sound off on all things Broncos.
Hello there, Broncos country, and it is once again time for another episode of Building the Broncos. I am your host, Carl Dumler, and with me as always, I have my co-host and good friend, Mr. Nick Kendell. Nick, how are things out there in Iowa, buddy?
Hey, it looks like we got another polar vortex coming down, and I am excited for that next weekend. Negative 10 degrees against, that'll be great. And it's the winter that never ends, so I'm living, man. No, I went to the dentist today, no cavities. So it's the little things, right? That's what adulting becomes. I don't have to deal with that.
There you go. Looking for the positive in life. That's what I like to hear.
I think spring is around the corner.
Can't come soon enough, that's for sure. Yeah. But it'll get here, and in the meantime, we got some Bronco football and football in general to talk to you about. So make sure you go out over to Twitter and follow me at Carl Dumler MHH and Nick at Nick Kendell MHH. You can follow the podcast Twitter account at HuddleUpPod and make sure to subscribe to our show and leave us a rating as we value your input on our show. You can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, and even that of YouTube. Also, make sure you head over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of 24/7 Sports and the CBS Sports Digital, to find ours and our co-writers' articles and all things pertaining to your Denver Broncos. This podcast is powered by Overtime Media. Also, just want to say that we're going to have two of our writers at the Combine this week. So really make sure to be over there at our website, and we're gonna have a ton of content. I can promise you that, because like I said, it's Combine week. The underwear Olympics, as they like to call them. But hey, it's still a lot of football information, and I'm excited. What about you, Nick?
Yeah, I'm definitely excited. It's too bad I won't be out there this year. My sister doesn't live in Indy anymore, and got the wedding coming up that I need to pay my own money for, which, that's life. I made that decision. So I'm getting down to that knee. That's the choice. But yeah, the Combine's going to be great, and Chad and Zach will have a lot of fun out there, and I'm curious to hear how everything goes out for them out there, and what little bit of insider information, what sources they can work, and just their general impression on some of those guys.
Definitely. Now, before we get to the Combine, I wanted to answer, I completely spaced it a couple weeks ago. We had one of our listeners, Paul, and we've known Paul for a while. He's at one of our message boards that we've been writing at for a long time, where Nick and I actually met. And he'd asked us this a couple weeks ago, so I wanted to go ahead and answer it. And he asked the question of, how did we become Bronco fans? I'll let you start with this question, Nick.
Well, for me, my old man is a Bronco fan. He's originally from the Missouri side, central Missouri, north central Missouri, moved to the Quad Cities. And, you're kind of in no man's land there. A lot of Bears fans, a lot of Packer fans, some Vikings, whatnots. But it's kind of a free-for-all. Geography lets you kind of be a little bit more wishy-washy, but the old man and his family used to go out to Colorado all the time in the summer, and they didn't really have, not a Chiefs fan. The Rams weren't really prominent then, so he decided to be a Bronco fan. And one of my first memories of watching football is that 98 playoff run. And man, I remember not only watching the Super Bowl then back in 98 when they beat the Packers, but I had 2 VHS tapes of the 98 and the 99 season, and I would watch those on repeat. Seriously, I could probably quote some of this stuff. And I remember watching, I don't even remember the terrible Jags game where the Broncos got beat in 97. Now I am definitely a bandwagon, but I've been on this wagon ups and downs since then. So I guess that's my story. And I got to thank the old man for being a Bronco fan.
There you go. Well, that's not quite my story. My story is my dad, kind of like yours. He was a Bronco fan. And so I just kind of started watching with him. And I remember those Super Bowl years. I remember the game against the Packers. My school had 5 Bronco fans. That was it. And so I invited them all over to my house. And I remember doing dives over the couch like Terrell Davis and trying to do the spin move like Elway, which was impossible unless somebody's hitting you. And I remember spilling, I think it was pudding on our couch. That was not good, chocolate pudding. But no, I asked my dad later, I said, well, how did you become a Bronco fan? And his answer was, well, your grandpa, my father-in-law, is a Chiefs fan, and I wanted to do everything possible that can make him angry. So I became a Broncos fan and told him that I was going to make you a Broncos fan. So our Bronco fandom came from a little bit of hate, but thankfully it's grown into a great love.
Man, that's awesome. And I remember you lost some teeth due to some Bronco reenacting. So bringing it full circle with the dentist visit today.
Yeah. It's I've got the false teeth, and thankfully they've held up for a while here. Dentist told me they'd only hold up for a few years, and that's been about 10 years ago now.
Oh, there you go. Now we're about ready to start getting into this combine information here before everybody takes the field in Indy. But first, a quick break. We'll be right back.
All right. Well, that brings us again to talking about the Underwear Olympics. And this is one of those, so crazy that this event has become as big as it has. And it's been like over the last 10 years or so. And it's kind of part of my getting into the whole draft and off season was wanting to watch the combine, even though it's just guys running around in their underwear. Sometimes has very little to do with football, but it's still a fun event to go to. And so we thought we'd do a couple different segments here, kind of giving you some ideas of things to be watching for when it comes to this combine and things that probably honestly will matter. And I mean, because like I said, the combine, some of the running drills or lifting drills or whatever you want to look at, those don't matter as much, but there are still some things that you can gather from the combine that really help in the evaluation process. And so we wanted to do a segment. We're going to call it the over-under segment. And it's pretty much the measurements when we're looking at these are ones that teams really care about. And of course, we're going to start with a guy, one of the most controversial players in the entire draft. I think he's probably the most controversial player in the draft.
Absolutely.
And that's Kyler Murray. And I don't know if our listeners have seen, there's a picture of him at a basketball game where he looks big, which is weird for Kyler Murray. So there's a lot of, did he put on a ton of weight for the combine? We'll see if he runs, things like that. We'll get into that more later. But I guess, Nick, over under that he weighs over 200 pounds coming into this combine.
Well, I think I would have said under, if he was actually going to be testing and whatnot, and that is close to his football weight. But I've seen pictures of him recently, and that dude looks like a little bit of not in a negative way, but a little chunky. He's eating that oatmeal straight up and putting on that mass. So I'm actually going to take the over on 200. I think he's going to be about 205, and I don't think we see him do anything else because that could have been, a detriment to maybe some of his physical testing. But the biggest thing for him, he needs to come in. You can't make him too much higher. He can't be wearing that platform shoes. But what he can do, he can be getting up there in that weight. So I'm actually going to go over on the 200 pounds.
I'm with you, actually. Just looking at that picture, I'm going, man, this guy's about ready to rip out of his clothes.
Yeah. That's how I look right now.
But I guess then here's my question with the over-under of him maybe coming in over 200. Does that change any of your evaluation of him?
Man, I think it's important that he does hit that 200-pound mark and looks like he carries it well and everything like that. But I think I'm not reading too much into it. They said last year he played at about 180. I think in the NFL he needs to play about 190. I would rather him be about 190, 195 and see him run and jump and throw rather than seeing him 210, 205 and do nothing. But it is important, but how important is it? It's meh.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And I think I worry a little bit more of just how he carries it.
Yeah.
If he actually looks like it's muscle that he's put on, then I'm a lot more good with it. If it's just, hey, I put on weight because I know I needed to hit that 200 threshold, then I'm going to probably actually lower my thoughts on him a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, it's possible that weight is going to matter. It's also that hand size. Right now, if I had to guess anything, I think he's going to come in. You're going to see him height, weight, hand size, arm length, all that stuff. And that's all you're going to get from the Kyler Murray mock draftable web. I don't think he's going to run. I don't think he's going to jump. And probably most, which I honestly don't care about. Like we already know that he's a really good athlete, but I do have concerns that he's not going to throw. He's going to wait until the pro day. And it didn't matter for Sam Darnold last year. There's been some guys not throw before, but I like it when the top guys out there throw and kind of stack up against the guys around him. Like Baker Mayfield last year, there was no way in hell he was not going to throw. And it showed that his arm was, the ball, did he have the same kind of arm talent that Josh Allen had? No, but he belonged out there. So I would like to see Kyler Murray throw. And if anything, if he doesn't throw, that honestly, that's the thing that's going to make me the most concerned about him. Now, has he been training for it? Because this whole baseball process has maybe got him behind the curve in that regard. and maybe he's been more focusing on gaining mass. Shout out to Mac and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. If you haven't seen that, it's mass gaining season. But that for him, throwing and not throwing, I think that's the biggest thing that I'm looking for. That it could raise him or lower him.
I'm with you. I loved when Baker Mayfield made that decision because it just showed that fearlessness,
competitiveness. Honestly,
right? Well, yeah, there's that too. But because I'm sure that they're having people tell them, hey, this is not the place to go throw. It'll hurt your value. Teams will question every little thing, and which they do. But again, for me, if they're willing to go out there and do something like that, where it's not the best environment, it's not the best situation where you've never worked with those receivers or anything, but to go do it, I mean, that just shows something to me. So I hope he does, but I'm highly doubting that he does.
Yeah, and it would be good if he did, but it really doesn't sound like he's going to. So, yeah.
All right, well, now to the next quarterback. And this is a guy, he's already been measured once, but it's always amazing to me how much measurements can change from one event to the next. And that's Drew Lock with his hand size. Now, at the Senior Bowl, he measured in right at 9 inches. So what is your estimate over under 9 inches?
I think he's going to show in 9 inches and a quarter. I feel like last year we've seen hand sizes where the Senior Bowl is not as accurate as some of these other ones. And the Combine, they've had the same dude doing it for like 30 years. And most of the time, the Senior Bowl is a little bit more conservative on the hand sizes. We saw, I think, Baker Mayfield last year, his hands grew about half an inch or something. So I think Drew Lock's hands will be 9 and a quarter. Just total guess. I have nothing to base that on. I'm just maybe that's me being optimistic even. I don't know, but I think it'll be a little bit bigger than 9. I'll
go 9 and an eighth, just to be different.
Yeah,
but I guess I'm with you on the over. Again, does this change his evaluation at all? If he comes in, say, a quarter inch bigger,
it just makes it's another box that you can check in a little bit with a heavier mark. Like how much does that actually matter? He still has some issues with sometimes the ball is batted out of his hands in the pocket. That could be more of a hey, the alarm bell needs to be going off in his head kind of thing than anything. But yeah, the bigger, the better. I mean, Nick Foles has monster hands. It doesn't really mean too much. And you have a guy like Jared Goff with 9-inch hands. How often is he getting, the ball knocked out of his hands? Granted, he's playing in Los Angeles. The weather's not terrible there during football season. But if it's under 9 inches, that then, yikes. Like if he measures in an 8/8 and 7/8 inch hand size, then whoa, like that's a concern. But the 9 inches, a little bit up, that's what you're looking for, and that should be fine.
Sounds good. All right, another guy. These guys are all possible top 10 picks for this upcoming draft, and so evaluation does play a big part in how teams decide to rank them here with all these other players. And this is Jonah Williams, and it's kind of crazy how much he's being maybe picked on a little bit. These next two guys have really been picked on a lot, and maybe the media have been overthinking things a little too much. But Jonah Williams, some people have really questioned his length. There are plays that you can see where that length really plays a big factor in him getting beat. Those long arm guys really seem to be able to keep him off their body and get to the quarterback. So I guess that over under of 34-inch arms, because that's always kind of that threshold that you're looking for between the guards and the tackles. Where do you think he measures in?
I think he's going to measure in 33, honestly. Just looking at his tape, especially against a guy like Clelin Ferrell, I think he is a little stubby, and he can play tackle, probably be fine there. I think I prefer him at right tackle, where he's going to have a little bit more help. But the general consensus, I mean, is it overblown? Maybe, but like Zach Martin was a really good tackle at Notre Dame, and he probably would have been a fine tackle in the NFL, but they moved him to right guard because he's a little bit more stubby, and he's a top 3 guard in football. So top 3, top 5 guard in football. Brandon Scherff, same thing. Mean, nasty. Didn't really have the arm length that they're looking for there. Does get beat against length on the edge, which is a thing. I mean, you got some really lengthy guys playing edge rusher in today's NFL. They moved him inside and top 3, top 5 guard. So I think he can play tackle. I think I would start him at right tackle if I was a team, but that doesn't make him not valuable. Is he a top 10 player if he's not a true left tackle? Probably not, but still valuable. So I'm going to say 33, and a team will try to start him at right tackle. But if you're like a zone team, especially if you're a zone team, right guard, maybe even center. I think those would be good spots for him. And, you can look at it as, hey, Jonah Williams, probably not a true blindside left tackle the next level. That lowers his value. But at the same time, this is a guy that I could see projecting playing 5 different spots in the offensive line at an average, above average, or better level. So that's a really valuable player and just a good football player. True blindside protector, though. I think he's going to measure in a little bit short. And it's not just that he's short, but you see him struggle with length from time to time. Everything else, pretty fine. Length can get him on his tape. And so that's where I think the concern comes from.
All right, well, I'm going to take the over, actually, and go 34 and a quarter inch.
You think he's longer than Bowles? Because Bowles came in exactly at 34.
I think because of his chest being so big, it sometimes probably gets in the way of his arms. Because Bowles isn't as upper body built as that of Jonah Williams.
A little more slender.
Yeah. And so I think that helps him out actually a little bit to be able to play that left tackle spot. I do agree with you that if I'm a team, I'm moving him. I'm not playing him at left tackle. I think, honestly, some of his best tape was when he was playing right tackle for Alabama.
Yeah.
I really liked what I saw from him there and his ability to move people. And usually teams seem to do where they have power on the left, speed on the right for their defense. And so left tackle is going to go against some of those longer guys, where right tackle is going to be going against a lot more of that speed and guys trying to get those inside moves as well. But I don't know. I think he'll be fine. I think he'll measure fine, and teams will kind of relax a little bit on whether he's going to move inside, outside. But like you said, he can kind of do both if you need him. A team that can draft him and say, hey, we're going to play you inside till we need a tackle, and then we'll move you outside either way. But I'm excited to see what he can do there at the combine.
Yeah, absolutely. He'll be really interesting, and now especially since we don't get to see Jawan Taylor, because he is not going to be doing the athletic testing, which is quite the drag, because was really, really hoping to see him. That might have been tackle 1. So
yeah, now that was a hamstring injury. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep. Which, I even think he talked to Dr. James Andrews, maybe.
Yep.
Don't quote him. Okay, he did. Yeah, and he said probably best not to do it. So, yeah, c'est la vie.
All right. Well, our next guy here, then, this is – it amazes me how much this guy has been raked over the coals over the last couple months. And you've just seen this guy go from a top 3 prospect to all of a sudden people are kind of going, maybe mid-first round. And that's Ed Oliver, one of the most athletic freaks in this entire draft. And I guess my over-under for him is 290 pounds.
I'm going to go under. I think he's going to be 285.
That's where I have him too, especially when he's going to be testing with speed and all those kind of drills. I think 290 is a little heavy for him. But it just amazes me. Like Aaron Donald, he tested really small. He was around that 285 range, and people started dropping him down boards and things like that. But now you've seen how Aaron Donald does on the field. And while weight is important, it's easy to see some of these guys just have man strength. and Ed Oliver is one of those guys. He just overpowers people. And his athleticism, his quickness, he gets people off base. And then he has enough strength to really throw even those guys that have 30, 40 pounds on him to the side. I've been watching a ton of wrestling. We just had state wrestling here this last weekend. And one of our wrestlers was a 4-time state champion, one of the best wrestlers in Kansas history. So have to give him a little shout out here. But watching how they use leverage and how they understand getting a guy off balance and being able to win with that, where you don't have to just actually outpower somebody, but you just get him a little off balance and then you have the advantage. Ed Oliver is perfect at that.
Yeah. He's really just a unique player. And it comes back to something we've talked about on this podcast before. Like, the concerns with him is because he's kind of a unicorn. I don't think he's going to measure as big as Aaron Donald. I think he's going to be closer to some edge players, honestly, when it's all said and done. the length is going to be a concern there. Maybe he'll have to play some edge at the next level. Maybe it's an inside-outside kind of guy because of those questions. But it's really teams that are just risk-averse against guys who don't check those boxes from the physical standpoint, the productive standpoint, the testing standpoint. I mean, it's really a box-checking thing. I mean, you hear Louis Riddick talk about it. You hear Daniel Jeremiah talk about it. And if that pick doesn't succeed, they're going to see, hey, well, he didn't check this box. Who approved this, even though the guy didn't check the weight box? And that guy's ass is on the line then, the scout or person in personnel that made that decision. So that's why you have those check boxes. It's data-driven stuff, but that does mean that you do have some outliers from, Kyler Murray, Aaron Donald, et cetera, Ed Oliver, all guys that could be unicorns in a sense. But you have those standards and set requirements that you're looking for a reason. It's just another box. So it is more important for him to test really extremely well, just show to be an athletic freak, run a 4.6 40 at 285. People will be talking about you in the top 10, even if there's some questions, if you're that much of a freak, that's fine. But yeah, I think he is going to measure in a little bit light. I'm hoping he measures 285 to 290, but I'm also really interested to see his length, because if he comes in with really short arms, that's going to have me concerned about where he's going, because guys are going to be able to control him a little bit more, get their hands on him first. And I think that limits some of his versatility that he needs. If he's going to be playing in some edge, some 5 technique, kind of being moved around and whatnot, he's going to need to not have stubby arms. So we'll see, but I'm very much interested. Aaron, you talked about Kyler Murray being an interesting player. People have been talking about Ed Oliver, this physical freak, since he was recruited and went to Houston. And now we finally get to see him in the combine. So I'm really excited to see what he's going to do.
For sure. And finally here for our over-under segment, I want to take on 2 cornerbacks that I know the Broncos will be heavily linked to just because they have such a big cornerback need. But the over-under of 5 feet 11 inches, and that is Byron Murphy and DeAndre Baker.
Yeah.
Where would you put them over-under on that?
I think Murphy's going to be under, and I'm going to say a push on Baker. I think Baker will measure in 5'11", 190, 195, and Murphy, you're going to see him about 5'10", 180, 185. He just looks smaller to me, at least. No,
I'm with you. Does Murphy coming in under 5'11", does that hurt his draft stock at all?
It doesn't help. People are going to have questions about, can he match up with true X receivers at the next level? Is he going to be just more of that inside-outside, number 2? Like, what's his upside going up against physical catch-point receivers? Is he going to be able to stay healthy, because he's going to have to take on wide receivers, blockers, et cetera, coming down. And the attitude's there, but does the body hold up? So I do think that won't help his stock. I mean, I can't think of many 5'10" cornerbacks that have been taking super high in the draft over the past few seasons. I mean, even round 1. What was Denzel Ward last year?
He was 5'10".
He wasn't 5'11". Well, there goes my whole point. So I'm pulling it up right now. He was 5'10" and 7/8.
Okay, well, I mean, he was close. I knew he was close, but
yep, 36th percentile with that 5'10" and 7/8. So definitely you need to check in at least 5'10" and a half, in my opinion, for Murphy. And also Ward ran a 4.32 40. So
right,
if he can,
help.
and the broad jump was the 98th percentile. It's 136 for all cornerbacks ever. So yeah, a little smaller, but that's kind of, I mean, that's the mold you want for Murphy. He needs to not be totally terrible in weight, 5'10", 183, and if he has just total explosive numbers, that'll push him up. But I don't think he is as athletic as Ward was last year. So we'll see.
No, I'm with you there. If he was that athletic, then he'd probably be that top 10 player.
And we'll see if he tests that way, then things will change. But I don't think he is.
Right.
Denzel Ward level athlete.
Well, moving on here, as always, we're chatterboxes today. But looking at the combine, and we're looking at the early days of the combine where there's a bunch of interviews, and this might be the medicals and the interviews might be the 2 biggest parts of the entire combine. Yeah. If we're being really honest. And unfortunately, the interviews, we don't get as much insight, I guess, into what's actually being said.
Well, it's complete hearsay.
It is. It really is. And always there's a bunch of smoke being blown at these kind of events. But I guess interviews for some players seem to be a little bit more important than for others. And so I want us to just kind of list up 3 players that really have to nail the interviews if they want teams to believe in them. And my list, I guess a couple of these guys are pretty obvious. Kyler Murray, I mean, there's questions of his love for the football. There's questions of his commitment. There's questions of, is he in it just for the money? There's questions of his size. There's questions of his ability to handle an NFL playbook and run it the way that they want it to. He's just got a ton of questions that he's got to answer. And, I mean, if he nails the interviews, it wouldn't surprise me if he's the first quarterback taken. Wouldn't surprise me if there's teams trading up to get the guy. If he can't make teams feel comfortable, though, he could see a pretty big slide.
Yeah, I think he's going to go around one. All it takes is one team to fall in love with him. But if he meets some of those weight requirements and shows off in interviews, I mean, we're not asking him to be Baker Mayfield, but show some intelligence on the board and some leadership and calm some of those nerves down, he could rocket up boards and be a top 5 pick. So we'll see what happens. It's again, one of the most interesting player roller coaster rides for any player in the draft since, gosh, I can't even remember one that this was this intriguing. There's just so many questions around him and the explosive tools, and from is he going to play baseball to the size to the kind of the small sample size of tape. There's just so many questions. So really fascinating. I don't think Denver will be the end of the team that takes that swing on him, so to speak. And that'll make some Bronco fans listening, I'm sure, very sad. But
sorry, Jennifer.
Yeah, what can you do? But we're not making the choice. So. But yeah, no, it's going to be interesting. And if he does well, that's honestly, I'm really pulling for him, because if he does great, that means that he's going to make somebody else fall to the Broncos potentially, or the quarterback they want, or another position. But I think quarterback demand at the top, if we can get multiple guys that do well in this process, just will make me feel better about no matter what the Broncos do at 10.
I'm with you. Well, my next guy here, Gerald Willis. And this is a great defensive line group. I mean, we've talked about it ad nauseum on this podcast here. But this is a guy, you watch him and you sit there and you see the guy can be a freak at times. Guy's making plays in the backfield. He's a disruptor. He's strong. He's fast. He can do a little bit of everything. And yet he has to answer a ton of questions. He had coaches and players when he was at Florida that he didn't get along with, ended up transferring from the program, then got suspended, then decided to take a leave of absence to get his head right. Is that right?
Yeah, he's had an up and down career, so to speak, but everybody at Miami's spoken very highly about him since then. But there's some questions on the tape, and him being a little bit of an older guy as well. And, just attitude questions. So, yeah, interviews are huge.
And then my final guy, of course, is I'm going to go with Ed Oliver. And I don't think it's so much the teams are worried about him, but there are some questions. There's the question of him and his coach not getting along there for a little bit. There are probably some questions of he didn't have as explosive of a year this past year. And, I mean, you saw some of that with Jadeveon Clowney, where – maybe you're kind of trying to protect yourself a little bit because, an injury ends up being, millions of dollars lost, all those kind of things. But there will be a few questions of what kind of teammate is this kid? What's he really bringing to the place? I mean, and like you said, he's kind of that unicorn. Is he going to be that guy that breaks through everybody's kind of ideas of what it takes to be good at the position, at least athletically, or size, strength, all those kind of things, position-wise? I think he's just got to really nail those interviews to make a team, especially in that top 10, really believe, hey, this kid's going to be special.
Yeah, no, you're right. There's a lot surrounding him. He could go, talking with Eric earlier today, he could go as high as 9. Some people still think he might go top 5, but then you see other people pushing him down to 17, 14, so very interesting. And I wonder if, like Solomon Thomas, not really having to define the position along the defensive line, being a pretty big bust so far, looking back from the 49ers going through overall a few years ago, is going to have an impact on Ed Oliver. He really does need to come in and weigh 290, 295, rather than Thomas, who, 273, playing that edge rusher, kind of a little bit different, but explosive athletic testing for defensive linemen, but just still needs to have that mass. So, yeah, interviews will be big for him. Jacket gate, whatever you want to call that incident with his coach, that'll be interesting to follow as well. But this is outside of Kyler Murray, I think there's nobody that intrigues me more as an overall process than Ed Oliver in the combine.
Who are your three then?
My three guys right now, I have Greedy Williams, a guy that I don't think there's going to be any questions about his testing. He's going to be long. I am curious about his weight, but he's going to be long, 6'1", 6'2", long arms. He's going to move well. He's going to do well in the 3-cone, the running drills. You're going to see him jawing up with, primetime Deion Sanders after running the 40, talking that cornerback talk, all big, puffing out the chest, all excited, talking smack. And that's kind of what Greedy Williams is. But the question really comes down to the interviews with him. If any good team is going to try to get under his skin and ask him, hey, it looks like you didn't give a damn half the time out there on run defense and just super inconsistent in his focus and his physicality, et cetera, and some questions about the effort, you really need to get in there and get under his skin, because if you're talking about a talent, I don't think anybody comes close to Greedy Williams in this class as a defensive back. I mean, safety, cornerback, doesn't matter. The length, the fluidity, the ability to change hips or flip hips, the overall speed, it's all there. But the questions come into what's in between his ears and what's in his chest. So interviews will be huge for Greedy Williams, and how he does there could have a huge impact on his stock. I mean, you could be talking to a guy that could go as high as 5 to Tampa Bay. Honestly, when it comes down to it, they need help in the secondary, or a guy who could fall down to probably the last 10 picks of the first round, depending on how this whole process goes for him. He's a guy who came in at the beginning of the year, consensus cornerback 1, but the tape leaves a lot to be desired in terms of the consistency and the effort. So interviews will be huge. For me, another guy now that interviews will be huge is Jawan Taylor, because he's not going to test. There are going to be some questions about his, I guess not work ethic is a concern, but his ability to stay in shape. He was a dude who was like 400 pounds, 380 pounds. Now he's going to be down to, they listed him at 330 at Florida, but interviews will be big for him, his intelligence level, his work ethic, because he's not going to be doing the testing. Yeah, so is weight going to be a concern for him? Is he a guy who you're constantly battling with his diet to keep him down below 330? That's pretty much, there's not many offensive tackles in this league, especially ones with his size. Maybe some 6'8", 6'9" guys can have a little more leeway, but 6'5", he needs to not get above 330. So that's going to be a question. Hopefully he measures in 320, 325 and doesn't look sloppy. But on the tape, I don't think he's got the best build, honestly. Like the frame is there, but there's a little bit of slop to him. So that'll be interesting to see the interviews and all that stuff. And then finally, we were talking about it back and forth here beforehand, but Jeffrey Simmons is a guy that originally they weren't going to let him do the interviews. Then it came out that they're going to let him, Preston Williams, and Jalen Ferguson come in to do medicals and limited interviews. So Jeffrey Simmons is a guy, tore his ACL, wouldn't have been able to do the athletic testing anyway, but now he gets to come in, do the medicals, which obviously that's the biggest part for the ACL, but the interviews are going to be big for him as well. And I could see a team picking the end of the first round, definitely early second round. If he's on the board in the second round, he'll be one of the first 3 picks off the board. But second round, maybe to get that 5th year option, give him a redshirt year his first year, and talk about stuff to prove with the interviews. I think a lot of people already have their opinions with Jeffrey Simmons. He's going to be coached up. I don't think he's considered a pretty bright kid. So I don't think the interviews are too big for him. Like, teams already have an idea about the assault. It wasn't a domestic violence. It was assault from when he was the year between high school and college, but still interviews will be big for him, and big that the NFL, I think it's good that the NFL is letting those guys come in to do the interviews as well, because isn't that the whole point? Like, I get not trying to reward them, but the NFL wants to check these guys, so bring them in.
Yeah,
don't let them test, that's one thing, but bring them in for the interviews.
Right. I've never understood that part. You're just hurting NFL teams and their ability to evaluate a player. I mean, it's just another box to check off, and especially these are the guys that have the most questions. So why not have them come in for teams to have that at least 15, 30 minutes, whatever it is, and get a chance to sit down with the kid. I just think that's actually hurting both the player and the team. Yeah,
it just makes it harder. Like, do you want these questions answered? Well, don't make it another hurdle for the teams. You're just hurting the evaluation process. Now, we still got a bit to get to on the combine here, but first we're going to be taking a quick break, and we will be right back.
All right, well, welcome back, and we wanted to do a quick segment here of kind of looking at some players of the same position, and maybe some of them are closely graded. Some of them it's a little bit off on where they're graded. But I guess maybe what is that that's going to separate this group? What do they need to show at the combine that is going to really make a difference of where they're going to be ranked in their end ranking? And it's not just the top guys that we're talking about, but a lot of these guys are actually that next tier. Because a lot of times you know who those first few guys are, but beyond them, it kind of gets pretty muddled. So what do these guys need to do to really separate themselves from that next group? And we're going to start off with Dalton Risner, Yadni Kajuste, right?
Yadni Kajust.
Yadni Kajust. I just want to make sure I got things right here. And Andre Dillard. These are our three guys. Andre Dillard, I mean, he's going to have to show some testing on a couple things here and there. But, I mean, left tackle guy that a lot of people have hyped up, maybe is that first round kind of guy. Same with Yadni Kajust. Dalton Risner, there's a little bit of question of where he's going to go. So my question to you then, I guess, is what do they need to show to really separate themselves from the other two?
Yeah, for me, I think that they're a little bit different. You know, Andre Dillard is a guy who's probably a pure tackle, where Kajust and Reisner are ones that you'll have going between tackle and guard maybe. But I think that all these guys checking out lengthwise, movement-wise, side-by-side will be big. Right now, if I had to guess, though, the biggest thing is that Andre Dillard is the most pure left tackle prospect and the most pure pass blocker, and he'll show that in the drills. I mean, he's going to be an incredibly fluid mover, so I'm really excited to see him there. After that, I mean, I guess it comes to like the three cone and the foot fluidity between Risner and Kajust. Kajust was a guy who was originally supposed to go to the Senior Bowl, backed out, but he needs to show some light feet. He needs to show the length, and instead of just being a guy who some think he's going to be moved into guard because his feet aren't light enough. And then Risner, we already saw him down at the combine, but I want to see some of these drills, the length reaffirmed there, and I want to see that three cone. You know, if he's some of these guys, honestly, the three cone doesn't matter as much for the tackles, but for guys that maybe want to kick inside, I need to see them that they have a little bit of ability to move laterally, quickly change directions, because that's more of the life of a guard on the interior.
For sure. I do think because Dillard doesn't have that position versatility as much as the other two, he really needs to make sure that he locks down, showing he can really play that tackle position for sure and play it at a high level. These other guys, because they have that position versatility, a team can take a little bit more chance and say, hey, we can draft this guy to be our right tackle, but if he doesn't work out there, we can kick him into guard. And so that could be a really big thing for him, is just making sure that he tests well, shows well in those drills like you talked about, and shows that he's just – I don't know. It's kind of weird because for me, I'm not really worried about him in those pass setting drills. It's because of that Washington State offense. My biggest concern with him is his run blocking, because they just don't do a ton of it. And even when they kind of do some run blocking, it's more like a pass blocking of just getting your guy out of the way, like letting him run like it's a pass set and then blocking him out of the play. And so there's more concern for me on that, but I don't think you can really answer that there at the combine either.
Yeah. It'll matter on the drills. You know, if he answers those questions on the drills, the fluidity, and it's just obvious that those feet glide, and guys like Tony Pauline just rave about his movement, I think that's what it comes down to. So I honestly think Dillard in the end is the guy who goes first, but I do hear your argument, just because left tackle and that pass blocking, that's what's most valuable in today's league. But those questions with the run blocking are still going to persist. So it'll be big, but I think teams will talk themselves into the fluid mover at left tackle. I mean, if Colton Miller can go, what did he go, 12, 11, something silly like that, then Andre Dillard can go quite high.
It's true. I'd rather have Dillard than Colton Miller, that's for sure.
Yeah, and Colton Miller, I would say, has more blocking upside as a pass or a run blocker, but Dillard's smoother and longer. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, this next group, this is that next tier of defensive linemen. We've already talked about some other guys on this show of Quentin Williams and of course Ed Oliver and things like that. But then there's this next tier of guys, and Jerry Tillery, Christian Wilkins, and Draymond Jones. Is there really anything that these guys can do to lift themselves above the others? Because I think one of these guys is probably going to go in the first round. Which one? More. If not more. I mean, I do think that they could climb, especially if they have a really good combine. They could really climb into the group. But for me, I guess Draymond Jones, I need to see some of his strength drills.
That might be the least important drill.
Well, it probably is. But I want to see that he's working on it, I guess, is one of my big things.
Yeah.
If he can show well, I mean, I know the bench press is not about how many times you can push it up, but it still boils down to showing how much work you've put into this event. And it'll show me how much he's willing to work in the weight room to get himself stronger, because of these three guys, he's the one that seems to get blocked out of plays the most.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I do think that if you're talking about the combine, though, as far as measurements go with Draymond Jones, I think that the frame is going to matter more than the actual bench press. Like, if he does measure in slender and, not long arms and 280, 285, does he have the frame to pack on more functional mass? That's what it comes down to me. And if he doesn't, then he's probably a pure 3-tech, maybe a guy that can rush some edge, maybe 5-7 snaps a game if you want to do that. But really, I just need to see that frame and if he can put on more mass. And then it comes down to, the speed, the 3-cone, everything like that. If you put a gun to my head right now, I think Christian Wilkins is probably the first guy off the board here, just because the production and everybody just raves about him as a locker room guy, a culture guy. That's a big part of it for these teams. But I could see all these guys going. Jerry Tillery, I need to see if he has some lateral ability. He looks a little bit stiff, kind of a downhill comer sometimes. So if he can move around at that tall, long frame, that's big if he can change directions there. And Jones, I just need to see that you're talking about a guy who's got great burst, he's got a Tasmanian devil spin move on the inside. But right now, with how he played, he looked really slender, not a guy with a lot of weight on him, and the run blocking is run stopping ability is a huge issue for him. So, yeah, all different. They're all interior defensive linemen, all kind of project to the same position for the Broncos, but all have very different skill sets, questions, and things that they can answer at the combine.
And our next group here, these are your boys. This is the Iowa versus Alabama group, and this is TJ Hawkinson versus Noah Fant versus Irv Smith. And I mean, I think for the most part, most people have them in that order: Hawkinson, Fant, Smith.
Yeah.
But they each bring a little bit of different skill set, obviously, to the field. Hawkinson's more of your inline guy. Fant is more of your attack the seam. Irv Smith, kind of the best of both worlds kind of guy. Can do a little bit of everything, but not quite to the level of Hawkinson or Fant of what they're great at. So I guess, is there anything that they must do? Is there any way that Fant can get ahead of Hawkinson or Smith can get ahead of either of these two guys? Or is there something Hawkinson has to do to keep holding on to that same spot that he's at right now? What do you think about that?
Well, Hawkinson is going to need to show that he can move around out there as far as his size. And he should be the first item off the board, but I think we might be reaching the point of maybe a little bit of hyperbole. Is he actually going to go top 10 as a tight end when O.J. Howard went, 19 a few years ago? Mm-hmm. We'll see about that. But Hawkinson needs to run, a 4.6 area and, kind of that George Kittle area. If George Kittle ran a 4.52, I'd be okay with a 4.6 from Hawkinson. But then the broad jumps, the vertical jumps, they all need to be up there. And we'll see if he does the 3-cone. Sometimes the tight ends don't, but needs to show that he's got the size, the frame, all that stuff. And Fant, I think the athletic testing is huge for Fant. And that's a guy who, if he doesn't match the athletic testing hype, then he's a guy who could slip behind Irv Smith. Right now, I think Hawkinson is a little bit better at everything as far as what Irv Smith does. I wouldn't even say he's the best of both worlds between them. Hawkinson just does everything a little bit better than Irv Smith. So he's a little bit bigger. He's a little bit better after the catch. He's a little bit better run blocker. He's better down the seam. He looks a little bit more explosive, et cetera, et cetera. So there's both inline guys. At least that's how I see them. Irv's a little smaller, maybe a little bit more slot ability. But Hawkinson, we'll see with the testing. But the testing and Fant stock is completely reliant on the testing. The tape is good, but if he blows him out and he runs and jumps like they say he's going to, then he is a guy that could rocket up boards. There'll be some questions about I don't want to say his family is a detriment, but his family have kind of caused some stir in the season. They were kind of complaining about his usage and everything in the season and causing a little bit of drama for the Iowa program. But other than that, Fant's been fine, and the testing should kind of help reaffirm how good of an athlete he is. And will he go round one? Probably after the testing. And I do want to give a shout out to Jay Sternberger as well. He's a guy that will give Irv Smith a run for his money if he does test well.
Yeah, that's a good one to add to that group. I'm with you. I think Fant, the testing is a little bit more important because, like you said, that's what he's known for. So if he doesn't show it, if he doesn't blow the other two away, it could really hurt his stock in comparison because those other two offer a little bit more, I'd say, maybe versatility in what they bring to to the field.
Multiplicity. There
you go. That's a better word. So I'm excited to watch those guys. Man, that tight end group, that's going to be that's going to be some fun drills. That's for sure. All right, now moving on to my position, and I just wanted to look at two receivers because these are the guys. They're both 164, 163. One's 214 pounds. One's 215 pounds. So these two guys pretty much very, very much similar. They have a little bit different skill set, what they bring to the field. But Kelvin Harmon versus N'Keal Harry. Now, I think most people expect the DK Metcalf's going to be the first receiver taken off the board. There's some talk of Brown being that number 2 receiver. I think with his injury, maybe that drops him a little bit. But these are those two guys that kind of go back and forth of what people like and what they bring to the field. But they're very, very similar. Is there anything either of them can do that can really separate them from the other?
Oh, man. They are very similar. I think that N'Keal Harry is a guy that everybody's still a little bit gun shy from Laquan Treadwell. Very good possession receiver, had some yak ability, but just could not separate. And that is a question with N'Keal Harry. I do see a little bit more athleticism, separation ability from Kelvin Harmon, but N'Keal Harry is a guy that has to test well. Him and another one that really is concerning, the guys that do they separate is Hakeem Butler from Iowa State. So the testing and their ability to move the 10-yard dash or the 10 yards of the 40-yard dash, so they kind of see the initial burst. That'll be big for him. The 3-cone ability to change direction, et cetera, which was a big drill for Cortland Sutton. So I think that the testing is going to be bigger for N'Keal Harry answering some questions because there are a lot of people out there that don't know if he can separate at the next level. What do you think?
Well, it's kind of weird. I guess for me, I like Harry more than I do Harmon, personally. I like his ability once he has the ball in his hands to go do something a little bit more than Harmon.
Yeah.
Hands-wise, I think they're pretty similar. I'm not really – they run different routes, I guess, is one thing. And I like Harry's routes a little bit more of what he runs and what he does with the ball. I don't know. I do think the athletic testing between the two will be a big indicator of which one goes first. Yeah. Because, like I said, they're about similar size, weight, all those kind of things. We'll see how the measurements really come in, at least at their college sizes and heights and everything. That's what they measure in at. But I do think they're going to come in pretty similar. And I don't know. Like I said, right now I like N'Keal Harry a little bit more. And so I need to see Kelvin Harmon and what he tests because there's times I questioned his ability to separate. There are times where I didn't see him really. He's one of those guys. He's kind of a little bit like Cortland Sutton, where you can get separation, but it takes you a while to get up to that top speed. Yeah. And so he doesn't have that quick burst. Neither does N'Keal Harry, but I just think he has a little bit more than Harmon, in my opinion. And so I'm interested, especially to see even those 10-yard splits. Sometimes those are almost more important to me than the 40-yard dash.
Yeah, it depends on the position. However, there are studies that show a strong correlation for the 40-yard dash and the offensive line, which like how many times you see offensive linemen running 40 yards on a play. Not very often, but if there's a correlation there, then there's probably something to it. Maybe just overall athleticism or the ability to carry the weight, and stamina maybe even as well. So something to ponder.
Have to look into that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, our next group here is the pass rushers other than Nick Bosa. And it's kind of crazy how much these next guys, they've all been put into different ranks. And I've seen sometimes Clelin Ferrell be number 2, Josh Allen be number 2. I think I even had somebody put Brian Burns at number 2 one time is what I saw. And so then you got Josh Allen, Clelin Ferrell, Montez Sweat, Ja'Kai Polite, and Brian Burns. So is the testing between all these guys, is that going to be what separates them?
I think team fit is going to matter a lot as well. I mean, a team that's going to be interested in what Josh Allen can bring to the table versus Clelin Ferrell. I mean, they both play edge rusher, but one is kind of more of that 3-4 speed guy that can drop into coverage and be a little bit more versatile and multiple that way. But you're banking on that pass rush upside, where Clelin Ferrell, he's more of a classic 4-3 defensive end with length and run stopping ability. And you're not really going to have that multiplicity with him where you can drop him back in coverage in zone, maybe even man at times. So it does depend on what you need and what exactly you're looking for to complement, so to speak. Like Bradley Chubb and Von Miller, both edge rushers, but kind of different skill sets there as far as a power versus speed guy. So testing will be big. How they move around will be big. But while they play edge, they still fit slightly different niches that will depend on the team culture, the team scheme, and the team fit. But really, yes, athletic testing, the length, the size, what they can do in space will help kind of rank some of these guys. Mainly the two that I'm really looking at in that regard are Polite versus Burns.
Yeah, me too.
And maybe Farrell versus Sweat, but the big two are Polite versus Burns.
Yeah, those are the two I've seen reversed all over the place of where they're ranked, and some people love Polite, others love Burns. It's just kind of crazy how they're, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how they test for sure. And now looking at the cornerback group, because this is a position that the Broncos are really going to care a lot about. And if they don't get one in the first round, this is that next group of cornerbacks. But Trayvon Mullen, Amani Aruye, and Julian Love. These seem to be the next three guys most people have on their boards. And I guess, is this the combine really going to be what separates these guys? I know they have different skill sets, so that will play into it as well. But the testing for these three, it seems like it's going to be pretty important for which one. If one of them really blows away the combine, I think that they really go up there to that number 4 spot at cornerback.
I would like to also throw out potentially Jawan Williams from Vanderbilt as well, who's been getting a lot of hype recently. I think he was as high as 33 on Daniel Jeremiah's recent big board over all three of these guys.
Ooh.
So another one to look out for there. And I also could see one of these guys, if they test well, Julian Love or Trayvon Mullen specifically. I think Owarie, we've seen him at the Senior Bowl. He's not going to test elite. I think he can still be good, but I don't think he's going to test elite. But I could see Love or Mullen, if they end up testing well, and let's say a guy like Baker doesn't test well, potentially there's an open spot for cornerback 2 or 3. I mean, that's on the table with some of these guys. That's how much the cornerback rankings are not set, especially when you got some guys that we talked about earlier with Murphy and Baker having some size limitations where, if you have smaller cornerback and need a boundary guy, you're maybe not looking as hard at them as you are a guy like Mullen or Owarie or Jawan Williams. So testing will be big there. I'm really curious to see how Julian Love measures. He's a guy that I like his game a lot. And if, he plays a lot of off ball, so there are some questions. Is it more instincts and just intelligence out there that he's playing with instead of some click and close ability, some true athleticism? So testing will be big for him. And he's a guy that I'm really intrigued to see for the Broncos as a fit if he's there round 2, as well as Jawan Williams. So just throwing it out there again, because he's one that a lot of people are very excited to see test. Some talking that, 6'3", 210-pound guy, they're thinking he's going to run a sub 4.5, which if he does that, I mean, you're talking about a guy who could go even the top 15, top 20. So we'll see.
All right. Well, and our last group here that we have is the quarterbacks. And we have the top 3 quarterbacks, mostly just is there anything that's going to really separate them here other than interviews? You talked about maybe the throwing, if Kyler Murray is willing to throw and getting that idea of where they're at. But is there anything beyond that that's really going to separate any of these guys from what people have them ranked right now?
I really want to see Haskins throw and see him throw compared to a guy like Drew Lock and even Daniel Jones, because Dwayne Haskins, for as good as he is with some of his decision makings, I do have questions about his ball placement and specifically deep. You see that ball kind of tend to wane a little bit, and Drew Lock isn't elite down the field, but I mean, he has the arm for it. The accuracy isn't elite down the field, but Dwayne Haskins, I think even less so. So seeing him up against some of these guys with the more arm talent down the field as pushers will be big. And I'd love to see Kyler Murray there too. I think he actually has a better arm than Haskins does as far as that velocity and pushing it. But again, I do not think we end up seeing him throw in the end of the day, which is a disappointment as a casual observer. Well, not a casual, as a fanatic observer even.
Yeah. Well, finally, our final segment that we're going to do here today is maybe some under the Raiders.
Ooh, yes. Like, hopefully never under the Raiders.
Some under the radar prospects that you are excited to watch. And these are the guys, sometimes they do become Raiders because they test really well. But beyond that, just some names that maybe some guys in the later rounds that could really skyrocket up boards just because of these numbers, making teams believe, hey, this guy's got some athleticism. We can turn him into a great football player. And I'm going to start off with here. This is a guy, his name's been thrown around a few times on this podcast, and he's a guy that was at the Senior Bowl, showed pretty well, Andy Isabella, and he's a guy that he has bragged that he can run a sub 4.3. And so, I mean, if this guy hits sub 4.3, I think you're going to start seeing this guy talked about a lot and can skyrocket maybe even to that second, third round area where teams are going, man, we want that guy that can take the top off of defense.
Yeah, I'm very interested to see how he does. I know Eric isn't a big fan with some of his route running and his hands, but he's a raw player with tools that, if you can sculpt him up, could be a really unique playmaker. Not only, yards after a catch down the field because he's an athlete, but you can move him around kind of like Kansas City does and get creative, reverses, moving it pre-snap, bubble screens, et cetera, et cetera. Once this guy gets the ball in his hands, he can be a unique playmaker, but it's the stuff that happens before he gets the ball in his hands that will be interesting. So I'm curious. I forget his testing numbers. I'm intrigued by that, but how he runs the gauntlet and how naturally it looks pulling in the ball will be big for me.
All right. Well, my next guy is going to be, O'Shane
Jimenez.
Jimenez. Okay. Just wanted to – some of these guys, man, they have to have these crazy names. But from Old Dominion, he's an edge player, one of the small school guys that really has an opportunity to make a name for himself. If he tests well, wouldn't surprise me if he climbs into that day 2 conversation. And but I've heard some people say he's not going to test well. Others say he's going to test well. I don't know. I'm kind of interested to see what he can do here at the Combine compared to everybody else. And then my final guy is Terrell Hanks of New Mexico State. Now, this is a guy that he got hyped up quite a bit at the Senior Bowl, kind of that off-ball linebacker that showed quite a bit of athleticism. And I think he could test well and, again, keep climbing those boards because, again, beyond the top 3 guys at that off-ball linebacker position, it's a lot of question marks. And so you could see some of this testing be a big separator of who goes next.
Yeah, you are 100% right there. And just like that, I'm going to use that as a squeaky clean transition. One of my standouts here, one of my 3 is Voshon Joseph from Florida, a guy that he's still getting down the mental side of the game, the coverage. Sometimes he can be over-aggressive and run down. But, man, the athletic upside here is huge. He's a guy who runs sideline to sideline, and you would assume, given how athletic he looks, especially in pursuit, that the coverage upside is there. I don't think it's there yet, but if he tests well at the Combine, he could end up being the third linebacker taken. I mean, the guy like Mack Wilson has been just dropping steadily, I feel like. So if Joseph runs well and shows out to be a little bit bigger and just more athletic than Mack Wilson, then look out. He's a guy who could climb up the boards. I do think right now he's my linebacker 4, and he's ahead of Jermaine Pratt, but I think he's a guy who could test really well, and not many people are talking about him right now. I don't really know why, but I think the Combine could change that. And then another guy who was held back because of the scheme, not really a great passing scheme, and they really wanted to use him, arguably the best run blocker from his position in the entire draft, and that is Foster Murillo from LSU, and Eric Oldholm, who is a beat writer for Football Weekly. He said that many people are starting to buzz about him, saying that he's going to shock people with his athletic testing, and he is just his blocking alone, I would make him a solid day 3 pick for me because he is a guy who opens up a can of whoop ass as that 6th offensive lineman essentially in line. But if he tests well and can move around well and shows okay at the gauntlet as well, I am very, very much intrigued. He's not going to pass a guy probably like Isaac Nwada, Hawkinson Irv, Jay Sternberg or whatnot, but is looking for a day 3 tight end, that one that could be a 2-way kind of player. He's a guy that I have circled and I'm very intrigued by. And if he tests well and can show to be a little bit of a receiving threat as well as a kick-ass run blocker, then sign me up day 3. And the last guy I want to touch on here, I've been doing a little bit of film preparation earlier today, watching some guys we're going to have Mark Schofield on. That episode will go up Saturday, but I was doing some Jarrett Stidham work because we're going to talk a little bit more day 2, day 3 options at quarterback. And this guy just kept standing out to me. And I checked around in some of the rankings on him right now. Some people have him as a day 2 player, yet I feel like he's getting no hype. And that is Auburn's wide receiver, Darius Slayton. Big play threat down the field, good field stretcher. I don't know if he has true burner speed, but he's one of those guys that, because he's long and he can move so fluidly, he can close space quickly. So Darius Slayton, the guy, I mean, if he runs and tests well, and he looks like a guy that was separated really easily, honestly made me concerned about Jarrett Stidham because, you're talking about downfield accuracy with Haskins. That's a big issue with Jarrett Stidham as well for a guy who supposedly throws a pretty deep ball. That deep ball is not very accurate from time to time, but Darius Slayton really caught my eye there for Auburn just because he moves so well down the field vertically and could create separation that way. So any closing thoughts, Combine here? Any guys you're predicting to be the biggest winner coming out and the biggest loser coming out?
I guess, I do think Ed Oliver is going to be a big winner. I think because he's going to test so well, teams, I don't think teams have dropped him out of the top 10. I think the media and fans have. And I think this is one of those drills or places that he can just show really well, and teams are going to be like, or media and fans are just going to be like, oh my gosh, this guy's awesome. And once again, be like, oh, I can't believe people had him out of his top 10. So I think he's going to do well. Players I'm really worried about, I guess I would say Cody Ford a little bit. He's on that bigger end. And I'm not going to say that he's going to have quite as bad of a combine as what his teammate from last year had. But I could see him not testing as well, and some people kind of saying, well, is he really that number 2 or maybe even that number 1 offensive tackle that's supposed to come off the board? So I don't know. I just don't think this place sets up well for him.
Yeah, I don't disagree. A guy that I'm worried about, honestly, we talked about him a little bit early, but N'Keal Harry, remember last year how interested I was in a guy like Auden Tate, big, body remover, possession guy, size, all that stuff. But then he shows, what did he run, like a 4.7, 4.8, something not good.
Yeah.
And he dropped out of the board. And I just have questions about N'Keal Harry's ability to separate, and that I think he could be probably one of the biggest losers if he shows not run very well. Same with Hakeem Butler. Again, I just got concerns there. But as far as biggest winner, I think probably in the end, even if he doesn't, it's so confusing, but even if he doesn't throw, I think if Kyler Murray shows out with at least okay hand size and is that 200, even if he doesn't throw a single pass, I think that'll be enough to be a winner this week, because just being there at the combine with, putting himself out there, it just feels like his stock is trending up day by day. So I think he'll be a big winner as well, especially after the measurements come in. Doesn't mean he's going to be high on the Broncos board, but again, it just takes one team. All right, well, that's going to wrap up today's episode of Building the Broncos, powered by Overtime Media. You can find Carl on Twitter at Carl Dumler MHH and myself at Kendell MHH. Also, make sure you head on over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of 24/7 Sports and CBS Sports Digital, to find more content covering your Denver Broncos. Head on over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating and comment. Your support can help us continue to bring you our Denver Bronco deep dives. You can follow the Building the Broncos podcast and all our other great audio content by subscribing to the Building the Broncos podcast or Huddle Up podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter at Mile High Huddle and at BTB Football Pod. For Carl, I'm Nick, wrapping up another episode of the Building the Broncos podcast. Combine week is here. The offseason is in full swing. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did this week, and we will see you guys soon. Go Broncos.
You've been listening to Building the Broncos. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.